Hello everyone. In this video, we're going to be going over some background information regarding clauses and phrases. Much of what we cover in this video is likely to be review for you, but it's good to have the terminology regarding clauses and phrases, the basic building blocks of sentences, well established so that we can move on to addressing many of the different grammatical errors and issues that we're going to cover later on in the course. So if there's anything that you need review on and that you need brushing up on, if you have questions about the kinds of clauses and phrases that exist in English, this is an excellent video for you because it's everything that we do with respect to grammar is going to rely on this fundamental background understanding. So, our goals at this juncture. We are going to review the basic components of a clause, what makes a clause, and what a clause actually is when it comes to the syntax, the structure of the English language. We're going to understand the basic forms of phrases that help to add detail to a sentence. So gerund phrases, participle phrases, infinitive phrases, and prepositional phrases. We're going to try to learn to understand the basic differences between an independent clause and a dependent clause. The ultimate objective is to ensure that every sentence we compose is clear and grammatically correct and complete. With the understanding of these kinds of phrases and these two kinds of clauses, we can then move on to the grammatical errors that are associated with failure to use these kinds of phrases and clauses properly. Today, though, we're only reviewing what these clauses and phrases are. So, with respect to the kinds of clauses that we have, a clause, by definition, is the combination of a subject and a conjugated verb. So if you have a subject for your sentence, a noun or a pronoun like the boy or the teacher, Matthew Van, or the like, and a conjugated verb, a verb that's conjugated properly in agreement with the subject, the noun or pronoun, you have a clause. To be considered a clause, the combination must include an active subject and a main verb, which is really just a restatement of the same thing in different terms. A sentence cannot exist without a clause. If you don't have a subject and a properly conjugated verb or main verb, you don't have a sentence at all. And failure to have one of those two things is often the cause of many of the grammatical errors that we're going to study in this course. A finite or main verb is simply a properly conjugated verb. So subject-verb combinations reveal both tense, past, present, or future. And remember that for our purposes, we're almost always dealing with an essay with the present tense, and number. Some examples. Rinosuke Akutagawa uses symbolism in the spider's thread. A non-finite verb, in other words, a verb that is conjugated but not conjugated properly, so we don't have a sentence, would be Rinosuke Akutagawa to use symbolism in the spider's thread. That's not a sentence. It's not a clause. It's not a complete thought. Another example of a non-finite verb, a verb that hasn't been conjugated to accord with the subject in terms of tense and number, Rinosuke Akutagawa using symbolism in the spider's thread. It's not a complete thought. It's not a complete sentence. It's not a clause because the verb using is not conjugated. Well, it is conjugated, but it's not conjugated properly as a main verb that agrees with Rinosuke Akutagawa, the subject. Phrases are groups of words that do not include the conjugated subject and verb of the sentence. So they don't have those two things that are necessary to make a clause. Phrases are usually short collections of words that add detail and complement the sentence's clause. So they expand on the meaning of the sentence, or they add detail to some of the things inside the sentence or the clause, but it's not a complete thought, it's not a complete clause, because it doesn't have one of those two critical things, the conjugated subject or the verb. Phrases, thus, because they don't have a conjugated subject or a properly conjugated, not a conjugated subject, but a subject and a properly conjugated verb, can never stand alone as a complete sentence. The types of phrases. There are three major types of phrases that use verb forms. There's the gerund phrase, the participle phrase, and the infinitive phrase. The gerund phrase uses the base form of the verb plus ing. So examples of these kinds of phrases would be showing herself off or listening to the snowfall. So it takes the base form of the verb show, adds ing, and includes a few other words in there, but the words together don't have a subject, right? Showing herself off. There's no subject in that phrase. Now, the gerund phrase acts like a subject. It almost acts like a noun or a pronoun. So the gerund as the object of a sentence, Dee adores showing herself off. I could say something like Dee adores, I don't know, Star Trek. Very good taste on her part. Dee adores Star Trek. So Star Trek would be a noun, right? And it would be the object of the sentence. It's what Dee adores. In this sentence, showing herself off is serving like a noun. It's acting like the object of the sentence. Just as in the sentence, Dee adores Star Trek, Dee adores showing herself off. The gerund, as a kind of quasi-noun or acting like a noun, can also serve as a subject. Listening to the snowfall brings the speaker peace. I could say that music brings the speaker peace. Music is a noun. It's the same form of a sentence as listening to the show snowfall brings the speaker peace. But in this case, rather than using a noun, you're using a gerund phrase, listening to the snowfall. Or let's say watching television makes me happy. It doesn't really, because pretty much the only thing I like to watch on television is Star Trek, and that's been off the air for 20 years. But regardless, listening to the snowfall is one of those gerund phrases serving as a noun. The participle phrase is formed the same way. So you take the verb form and add ing to it. But the participle phrase, unlike the gerund phrase, always serves as an adjective rather than as a noun. It modifies the noun. So just as I could say the beautiful Dee, right? Dee is the name of a person, or the beautiful woman, or the handsome man. Those words act as adjectives, right? They're describing the noun. Here, the participle phrase acts in the same way. Dee, showing herself off adds more information. It tells you more about Dee, but it's not a clause in of itself because it doesn't have a subject or a properly conjugated main verb. So Dee, showing herself off, wears flamboyant clothing. I could cut this part of the clause out, or I could cut this phrase out, showing herself off, and I could just have one clause, a sentence, Dee wears flamboyant clothing. Likewise, the speaker, listening to the snowfall, finds peace. Listening to the snowfall acts like an adjective describing the speaker. It gives me more information about what the speaker is feeling or what he's doing when he finds peace. I could just say the speaker finds peace, but the almost adjective of the participle phrase adds more information and tells me more about the speaker, the noun or the subject, or the object, depending on where the participle phrase is located, of the sentence. The infinitive phrase is slightly different because it's formed in a different way. The infinitive phrase takes the form of to plus the verb. So, some examples of this infinitive phrase. To describe the house, or to shave Tom's head. Like all phrases, these have to be attached to a full clause in order to make sense. An infinitive phrase plus a clause. So how we can use the infinitive phrase in the context of a clause, just as we can use the gerund phrase like a noun, and we can use the participle phrase like an adjective. How do we use the infinitive phrase? The infinitive phrase, like the gerund phrase, can serve as the object or subject of a clause. It can serve as the object or subject of the sentence. It can serve as the object, the thing that has something being done to it, or the subject, the thing that's doing something. So the infinitive as the object. James works to describe the house. To describe the house becomes the object of the verb works. It's what James is doing, or it's the thing that James is doing. The infinitive as the subject. To dance on the roof makes the mother feel happy. Again, both of them are serving as either the object or the subject, just like the gerund phrase. Now, we've talked about clauses already, but there are two kinds of clauses. One is the independent clause, and the independent clause is essentially the simplest kind of sentence that you can construct. An independent clause has what we said, the subject and the main verb that's properly conjugated. In this case, we have Dee causes her family pain. Dee is the subject, the noun that is doing something, causes is the verb, and then her family pain is the object of the sentence. Now, independent clauses can stand alone as a sentence. There's nothing missing. There's nothing that's left hanging or unclear. A dependent clause is an incomplete thought. Because she does not respect their lifestyle. What happens because she doesn't respect their lifestyle? It's not a complete thought. If I had said, well, because she does not respect their lifestyle, comma, D causes her family pain, or D causes her family pain, comma, or just without the comma, D causes her family pain because she does not respect their lifestyle, then suddenly I have a combination of an independent clause and a dependent clause. But the dependent clause alone can't stand. It doesn't make sense. It's not a complete thought. Thus, it's not a complete sentence. The presence of the dependent word because prevents the clause from being independent. I could just say, she does not respect their lifestyle. Suddenly, I have an independent clause. But this word, known as a subordinated conjunction, and we'll talk about those more in a minute, this word, the subordinated conjunction because, turns an independent clause, she does not respect their lifestyle, into a dependent clause. Oftentimes, dependent clauses, when they stand alone in your essay, and they can't do that, they're not sentences on their own, are a grammatical error known as a sentence fragment. They're a piece of a sentence. They're an incomplete partial thought. Examples of dependent clauses. And again, remember that none of these dependent clauses can stand as a sentence. The underlying dependent word, or known as a subordinated conjunction, prevents each of these clauses from being complete. When D claims the quilts. Again, D is just the name of a woman. When D claims the quilts, what happens when she does that? I need more information. When D claims the quilts, she disappoints her sister. She disappoints her sister would be an independent clause, and when D claims the quilts would be a dependent clause because of the subordinated conjunction when. After the narrator promises to buy his sister a gift, again, not a complete thought, not a sentence. Who believes in the innocence of children? Now, if I had a question mark after that, that would be a complete sentence because it's a question. But I need more information. I can't put a period there because it's not a complete thought. It's not a complete sentence unless it's a question. Because the woods are lovely, dark, and deep, although the poem uses a simple rhyme scheme, which takes away his desire for ice cream before she makes her decision about the horse Flora. Now, dependent clauses, as I said, are fragments. Even though it has a combination of a subject and a main or finite verb, the dependent clause is not a complete and grammatically correct sentence. This type of clause is logically incomplete. It leaves out salient, necessary information to understand the idea. The idea isn't complete in itself, and so has to be attached to an independent clause in order to complete a sentence. The independent clause has to feature both a subject, that is, a noun that's performing the action. It has to have inside of it a finite or main verb that is conjugated to match the subject properly, so the subject and verbs have to agree. And the clause has to feature a complete thought, so it has no dependent word like when, although, because, while, and the like. Every sentence you write in English has to have at least one independent clause. So a brief overview and checklist for every sentence that you write. You have a clause. There's a subject and a finite verb. That clause is at least independent, so you at least have one independent clause. If there are any phrases, are they properly connected to a clause? Right? Are they used in the way that the gerund, infinitive, and participle phrases are supposed to be used? If there are any dependent clauses, are they properly connected to an independent clause? And if you cannot answer yes to all four of these, then you need to rework the sentence. What I'd like you to do is to take a look at these phrases. In each of these sentences, you have a phrase. The tigers filling the screen with images of power are beautiful. Eating bananas makes me happy. Alexander Hamilton adores dreaming about becoming president, etc. What I'd like you to do is to review those different kinds of phrases. And then tell me what each of these phrases actually is. Right? Is it a gerund phrase, an infinitive phrase, or a participle phrase? Pause the video now, answer those 5 examples, and then we'll go over the answers together. All right, now that you're back, the first example is a participle phrase. The tigers filling the screen with images of power. Remember, filling the screen with images of power acts like an adjective. It describes what the tigers are doing. So it's a participle phrase. It has the verb form plus ing. Eating bananas makes me happy. I could say music makes me happy, right? Music is a noun. Eating bananas acts like a noun. It acts like the subject of the sentence, so it's a gerund phrase. Alexander Hamilton adores dreaming about becoming president. Same thing. It's a gerund phrase, but this time the gerund is serving as the object of the verb rather than the subject of the sentence. To walk in the woods fills the speaker with peace. Well, there's only one thing that this can be. We have to plus the unconjugated root form of the verb. That means it is an infinitive phrase. and it's acting like a noun, right? To walk in the woods fills the speaker with peace. Swimming in the ocean, Brad is attacked by a shark. Swimming in the ocean gives me more information about Brad. It modifies Brad. It acts like an adjective, which means it's a participle phrase. What I'd like you to do now is to take these 5 examples of phrases and then use them in sentences, construct sentences around them. So pause the video, develop a sentence surrounding each of these, and then return back to look at some answers. Possible modifications or possible uses of these phrases. Driving to the store, I saw my best friend and his dog, so I've used a participle phrase. To live with Michael Obi would be a nightmare. That would be a infinitive phrase. I should say an infinitive phrase. Deciding which cereal to eat is a difficult choice. Now I have a gerund phrase because deciding which cereal to eat is acting like a noun. To dream is a normal part of sleeping. Again, I'm using an infinitive phrase. And walking down the path, John stumbled on a rock. Again, a participle phrase because the information walking down the path is adding information, or the phrase walking down the path is adding information to John. It's telling me more about him like an adjective. So, although we don't have a great deal of new information here, you might have been reminded of a few key terms that will be helpful for you as we move on. Because when we discuss such things as comma splices, sentence fragments, and other such subjects, those grammatical errors are going to rely on your understanding of the definitions of things like independent and dependent clauses and the various forms of phrases.